So Dan is the Chair of Photographic Sciences Undergraduate Program Director at RIT. We were just talking about that. It's a long title for something that is well-deserved. Dan is just immersed in photography, whether it's teaching, sharing, getting out there taking photos. He loves it, and he's been with Nik Software years ago. Gosh, Dan, was it 7 years you were with them? 6 or 7 years?
2009 to 2014, basically.
Yeah, so quite a long time. So he's the expert at the Nik Collection, so you're in good hands there. And so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to turn it over to Dan. I'll let him do this presentation for you. I hope you enjoy it. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you, Lori. I always smile after you give my intro here, so I appreciate that. And welcome, everybody, to the webinar. We are going to be talking about the Nik Selective Tool from Photoshop today. And the images that I'm displaying are wildlife images. Actually, several of them are our very own Lori Rubin's. So thank you for loaning me these images to demo with, Lori. Anyways, the images, it doesn't really matter which photos we're using, because the tools that we're taking a look at in this situation pertain to any kind of photography. It's the Nik Selective Tool. In fact, I'm going to just close this slide. These are the things that we're going to be getting into today. I want to walk you through the Nik Collection Nik Selective Tool preferences. I want to show you how to quickly access the tools for anyone who's not familiar. Apply effects directly on the image without even opening the Nik Collection. You can, of course, basically have a single click that applies particular things. I'm going to walk you through those aspects and some of those variables. The apply last effect, how meta presets work, and then also the brush tool. That is a feature within the Nik Selective, it is a function through the Nik Selective Tool, but it is a tool that is used with the Nik Collection in tandem with Photoshop. So it's a Photoshop version of the software. All right, so I'm going to close this, and I'm actually going to move over into this photograph just to begin with. I'm going to tap the Tab key on my keyboard. I am on a Mac. I am on a, this is Adobe Photoshop CC. I 22 as well. I think as up to date as I can get. And I want to talk to you about this little dock that I'm sort of moving around here. This is the minimized Nik Selective Tool. And I'm going to just go ahead and press the little box here. So I know it's relatively small. I tried to enlarge my screen to lower the resolution of my display so that it looks a little bit bigger. It's a little bit small though, so it's hard to see some of these little buttons via a webinar. Anyways, if I click on this little box right here, we are going to display the Nik Selective Tool. And this is where we're going to be spending most of our time within the webinar today, except for some very specific things. And many of you have seen this before. Many of you maybe have not seen this before, but this is how you quickly access both the Nik Collection in Photoshop, as well as a lot of the really interesting accessible features so that you can streamline your own digital workflow pipeline, so on. Now, if you just opened up Photoshop and you have the Nik software installed, but the Nik Selective Tool didn't just show up, I'll show you where it is. And I'll show you how to turn it on, and you can make it so that it turns on, or rather opens, anytime you open up Photoshop. So if you're like me and you're using the Nik Collection often, you probably will want the Nik Selective Tool to just show up so you have access to it very quickly and easily. All right, so here's how you do that. You go up to the File drop-down menu, right? So you're in Photoshop, you go to the File drop-down menu, you go down to Automate, and then in the Automate section here, you have the Nik Selective Tool 2. When you click on that, the Nik Selective Tool will pop up. And just in case, if anybody missed one part of that, I'll just do it one more time really quickly. You just go to the File dropdown, to Automate, and then from Automate to the Nik Selective Tool, in case anybody had sort of looked away from the screen. Now, I also want to point out that in this webinar, we are going to have a smattering of Nik Nik experts, people who've been using the tools for years. And then we're going to have a group of folks who've never even opened the software before, but maybe just got it or are toying with the idea of it. Thank you for coming and joining this, by the way, to everybody. And then we're going to have probably a massive group of people who you're not going to learn, like everything I say isn't going to be brand new, but some of it's going to be new to you. And hopefully everybody gets something out of this. Anyways, the way you access that Nik Selective Tool is by going to the File dropdown, Automate, Nik Selective Tool. And then once you've clicked on that, your Nik Selective Tool is going to open. All right. Now, within the Nik Selective Tool, you have access to the entire suite. So your noise reduction with Define, your light and color adjustment with Viveza, perspective control and correction with Perspective Effects and HDR, Color Efex Pro, Analog Efex Pro, and so on and so forth. As you initially launch the tool, it's going to launch, it might actually launch like this. So this little tiny toolbar that just has sort of the individual icons. And for folks who primarily use the software by just launching it and utilizing random or an assortment of tools, this might be a great way of using the Nik Selective Tool. But a lot of folks probably will both want to be able to read the type, as well as might want to be able to access some of these really interesting workflow tactics and tools. And that is to the right of each one of these different labels, or almost every one of these different labels, let's say like Color Efex Pro 4, if you look at the little caret that's to the right and you just go ahead and click on it, this is going to open up one of the ways of launching into a particular piece of software, into a particular filter or preset, or in Color Efex Pro, what's called a recipe, which is a grouping of the individual filters. Now, I'm going to sort of put a pin in that for just a second, because I want to walk you through some of the Nik Selective Tool settings. And we're going to hit upon some of the same things over and over again, because by changing some of the settings, you change the way the Nik Selective Tool responds. And I want to give you some use cases for kind of each one of these things. But for the most part, whenever I'm using the software, I tend to click on these little carets and I will just launch directly into my favorite filters. Or if I'm going to convert an image from color to black and white, I'll go into my Silver Effects, and these are my favorited Silver Efex Pro presets. I'll even show you how to build these out in the next couple minutes as well. Now, if I click on one of these presets, one of two things is going to happen. Usually, and by default, if I click on one of these presets, the Silver Efex Pro software is going to launch, and I'm going to have this dark glow or whatever preset I click on applied in my preview inside of Silver Efex Pro. But there's actually a way of utilizing these different presets without ever actually launching the Nik software. It basically, when you click on the preset, it basically just applies the tool for you, and you don't even open up into the Nik software. So let me show you what's happening and how to make those decisions and how that's kind of working. So if you follow my cursor, by the way, if this is at all confusing, I promise it will. We will get lots of clarity on this as we start clicking on some of these buttons. Just want to kind of give you a precursor before we jump into it. So if you follow my cursor into the lower left corner of the interface here, there's a little gear in the lower left corner of that Nik Selective Tool. And if you click on that gear, your Nik Collection preferences are going to launch. Now, your first preference is open the Nik Selective Tool automatically on launch. Right, and so I have this tool checked on because I use the Nik Collection all the time, and I want the Nik Collection to open when I open Photoshop. So this is on. If for some reason yours is not checked on and you'd like it on, you just literally click on it, check it. It will turn it on, and anytime you launch Photoshop, your Nik Selective Tool will open up as well. Or vice versa, if you don't want it, just turn it off, and then you can find the Nik Selective Tool through that File Automate sort of way. Or you can access the Nik Collection through the filter drop-down menu. But the whole point of this webinar is to walk through the tools within the Nik Selective Tool, and I think once you get used to what they're doing, you'll probably will like that docked or that window kind of launched and open. Okay, so into your filters. So apply filter 2. We've got two options here. You've got active layer and image composite. If you're in Photoshop and you've got a whole bunch of layers on your file and this active layer is on, basically the software is going to just use whatever pixels are on the active layer. If you follow my cursor over to the right side, it's going to use, in this case, the background pixels, right? If this is set to active layer. If you leave it on image composite and you then open up one of the Nik tools, what's going to happen is before Silver Efex Pro opens or before Color Efex or whatever tool you're using, whatever Nik Collection tool you're using, before it opens, Photoshop is going to do what's called a merge stamp visible, which basically you'll get a duplicate layer of your pixels of your image. I'll show you that. In fact, let's click OK. I'm going to talk to you about apply brush and apply favorite filter recipes in the next couple of minutes. Let's just click the OK button. So right now I've got it set to the composite image. So if I go into Silver Efex Pro, let's go ahead and just quickly access this by clicking on the Silver Efex Pro button within the Nik Selective Tool. Silver Efex Pro is going to launch. Photoshop did that thing that I was just telling you about, the merge stamp visible. I'm going to go and just click on one of these presets. I'll just make a couple little adjustments. We don't even have to do all that much work because I just want to show you, what's kind of happening with this merge stamp visible. But let's say we really love this black and white conversion. I'm going to click the apply button. As that applies, I just used a preset that was on the left side of the interface and then kind of massaged the tones a little bit. But the setting that we turned on, so I'm going to go back into our settings. The image composite setting did this over on the right side, right? So the software, Silver Efex Pro, did not apply our Silver Efex adjustment on the background. It actually did that merge stamp visible. So we're working in what would be called a non-destructive workflow, in so much as it's an extra layer of pixels so that we can get back to the original if we needed to or wanted to. So that's very handy to be able to work within that image composite mode. Apply brush effect. So into our Nik Collection preferences here, I'm actually going to show you these two things later in the webinar. I'll just explain them right now and then I'll show them to you later. But the merge to current layer, basically that's going to kind of bake any of your brush applications into your current layer, and then apply to separate layer allows you to basically have a separate layer for your brush tool. And then again, that's sort of a more non-destructive workflow. So apply to separate layers the way I prefer to work. And that's just because I'm okay with a file getting larger in terms of its storage. So anytime you've got more layers of pixels, your file is going to get larger if you save those layers of pixels. And so merge to current layer allows you the opportunity to have a smaller file, but once your work is done, you're kind of stuck with that work, kind of. So I tend to keep this applied to separate layer on the way that it is. Now, apply favorite filters, recipes, and last edit. Right now, this setting is apply in Photoshop, but we also have the ability to apply this in the Nik Collection. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to click, well, actually, let's leave this on apply in Photoshop. I'm going to click OK. Let's just jump into a different photograph. This is another nice image by Lori. Thank you, Lori. Give that a second. Now, a minute ago, when we accessed Silver Efex Pro, I clicked on the button, the Silver Efex Pro sort of button itself, and that launches us into a default black and white conversion, right? But all of these settings underneath are some of my favorite, well, they're all of my favorited presets from Silver Efex Pro. As well as the last edit, right? And of course, the last edit was the preset and the adjustments I made on this image with Silver Efex Pro. So if I were to actually click on last edit, because of that preference that I just showed you, the apply in Photoshop, Now what's going to happen is by just simply clicking that button, we're going to get the exact same set of adjustments on our zebra photo as we got with our cheetah photo, right? It's the same preset with those same adjustments because I clicked on last edit. The key to this, though, I'm going to actually delete my Silver Efex Pro 3 layer. So I'm going to move over to the right side and delete that layer. The key or the difference between apply in Photoshop and apply in Nik Collection is that when I had that set to apply in Photoshop, when I clicked last edit, it just did all of the work for us and it applied it without us ever entering into the Nik software suite, right? The Nik software Silver Efex Pro. Because I went and just changed the apply favorite filters recipe to apply this tool in the Nik Collection, I'm able to now go into the last edit button, and instead of actually, I think the software is, I was getting concerned that the software wasn't going to launch. So what has happened now is we got that same preset. So I used, I think it was in En Vogue, the dark selenium preset, and then I had made a few adjustments to it on the cheetah photograph, and those things are reflected here. But instead of the preset just kind of being applied and we kind of go on with the process, when we've got the apply in Nik Collection preference on from the Nik Selective Tool, we now open into Silver Efex Pro so that we can come in and kind of fine tune any adjustments we might need to, right? And so this comes down to the kind of workflow that you want to work within. Meaning, some folks, my good friend Frank Kost, who's a professor here at RIT, he has several presets that he uses to balance out his images for books, because he publishes books all the time, mostly self-published books. He's got several that are not self-published, but he literally does what's called the instant book project, where he will go to a local grocery store and document his trip, and then he will publish a book about it literally that day, and he calls it an instant book. It's an interesting, beautiful, brilliant idea in terms of, you know, making art and having it last forever in the ether of the Amazon books sort of world. But anyways, his presets he has created balance out his brightness and his contrast for these particular kinds of printing processes. And therefore, he would much prefer to work within this apply in Photoshop, because he needs to run through a whole bunch of images really quickly so he can publish his book that day. And he's less concerned with being precise or fine-tuning, you know, individual images in a particular way using the Nik Collection, and would be more concerned with fixing or correcting, you know, the tonal range of the image so that it prints properly. So, you know, for him, it would be a better process if that was his rationale. He's trying to print a book and he's trying to do it that day, you know, to be able to work very quickly with the apply in Photoshop. Whereas, you know, for the most part, I like playing within the Nik Collection. So I will oftentimes much prefer to apply it in the Nik Collection. So when I click on my preset or last edit, the Nik Collection will open, and I can do some post-processing and you know, fine tune and adjust any of the things that we might need to adjust. All right, now we've established that each one of the Nik Collection softwares has their own button, right? So this is the Silver Efex Pro button. If I click on it, it launches into a default black and white conversion. We have established that if I click on last edit, basically what's going to happen is that the last set of instructions we gave Silver Efex, or the last set of instructions we gave Analog Efex Pro or Color Efex Pro, because each one of these is going to have that last edit button, will be applied to the image. Depending upon which way you have apply favorite filters, you will either be going into the Nik Collection, or it's going to just apply that last filter within Photoshop for you. So it's kind of up to you as to how you want to work. And it's a really interesting sort of different way of working. So some folks might actually prefer that this setting, apply favorite filters in Photoshop, basically apply to all of these things, last edit, and then any of the filters, recipes, or presets. But then if they ever want to go in and just play, you can just launch the software itself, right? So it's just another way of approaching utilizing this software as a workflow. You can work very quickly and easily with these individual buttons by having it apply in Photoshop, and then when you want to play, you can just click on the specific piece of software, or you can kind of work in a different thought process where you always are launching into the Nik Collection software or tool. Okay, let me jump into our next photo here. So let's use Efex Pro in this case, and I want to talk to you about how to favorite a filter and how to favorite a recipe, and then how that sort of factors into some of the other software as well. Oops, I just opened into Efex Pro. That was actually a mistake. I didn't mean to do that, but I can still show you how to favorite a recipe, would be called a preset, here within Efex Pro. Of course, Efex Pro is designed to take multiple images shot at different exposure values to create a higher dynamic range image than what can be done in a single capture. Or you can do what we did here, which this was just an accident, but you could just open a single image into Efex Pro. And I went and just clicked on this preset here, number 3, deep. This is called, it's number 3, deep 1. If I wanted to favorite any of these presets, you just click on the little star that's to the left of the label. So here's my label. I know I'm applying this image right now, this preset right now because it's highlighted in gold, and that's how you favorite it. So now that I've favorited deep 1, it will show up within the Nik Selective Tool so that we can use it quickly, and apply it quickly through the Nik Selective Tool. I'm going to go into some of my en vogue presets here, and I'm just going to favorite a couple more. So I'm going to favorite daylight to evening. I've already got natural dark. All right, cool. So let's say we've got those favorited. I clicked on deep 3. That's what we've got here. Of course, we can go in and make adjustments with tone compression and HDR method. There's all sorts of great tools. We don't have enough time to talk about every one of these pieces of software, unfortunately. But let's say I click the OK button here. I've favorited that preset. Now, when I click into my Efex Pro, my single image, I've got all of my favorite presets here ready to go. So anyways, let's jump into Efex Pro. I showed you how to save a preset as a favorite from Efex Pro. That's very similar to what you would do within a lot of the other pieces of software. Efex Pro is interesting because you can favorite individual filters and you can favorite individual recipes. So this is really nice because, of course, those are different things. The filter is the individual facet, like a black and white conversion, or a film effect, or a low-key filter, right? So here within Efex Pro, I've opened up, I'm just gonna hit F on my keyboard for a full screen. It's a full screen shortcut. I've got low key applied. I'm gonna go ahead and just X out that filter. Got nothing applied to it. We're gonna go into the en vogue recipes, and I'm gonna click on clarity bump. And when I click on clarity bump, 2 things are gonna happen. First of all, it's gonna yell at me, say, okay, are you sure you wanna use this recipe? Because any filters you have applied on the right side will be replaced by whatever recipe you've clicked on. I'm gonna say yes. And that recipe consists of tonal contrast, brilliance and warmth, and pro contrast. So it's this nice grouping of filters that it's gonna basically create this really nice clarity bump effect. I'm gonna reduce some of the effect, go into brilliance and warmth. I'm gonna actually bump this way out of proportion just so we can get like a really dramatic adjustment here. So I'll desaturate, the standard saturation, and I'll add too much perceptual saturation. Let's go ahead and add in some contrast. And I'm going to favorite this as a recipe over here on the left. And I hope to do two things after I click the OK button here in Photoshop. I want to show you that the clarity bump recipe has been added. And then I also want to show you that last edit option, because we've done it with silver effects. I'm just going to drive it home here with color effects. That is, of course, I'm going to click the OK button. So over here on the right-hand side of the interface here within Photoshop, because we're applying it as a separate layer of pixels, of course, we can always look at our before and after, or utilize our background layer for whatever we might need to. You're looking at the before right now, and as I click on the little eyeball that's to the left of my layer here in Photoshop, we're turning that layer back on, and voila, you've got the adjustment with color effects. Great. Now, if I jump into our cheetah, I'm going to delete that layer, and I'm going to click on last edit. Okay, well, first of all, 02 clarity bump is right here. But I used the clarity bump recipe, but I changed my overall adjustments. So I want to use last edit here. So I'll just click on last edit, and this is going to launch the software and apply tonal contrast, brilliance, and warmth in Pro Contrast for us at those same settings that we had adjusted our last image to. Now, I personally prefer for my own workflow that I always open up into the Nik Collection, because I use the darken, light, and center filter and other filters like that pretty often from the Nik Collection. And when I'm doing that, I'm usually having to replace the center of filters, or I'm making very specific adjustments with control points. So I prefer using the apply within the Nik Collection as my default setting. I'm going to go ahead and just darken down my edge a little bit, click the OK button, and now we've got like this sort of overcolored, dramatized cheetah portrait here with our before and after. Anyways, what I'm getting at here is that last edit option is really quite nice. It's fast and it's easy. And I personally prefer that to open into the Nik Collection, though others might prefer that it's a faster process by turning this other option off, or using the apply in Photoshop option rather. That's just gonna do all of the work for you. Cool. All right. Well, it's 4:30. I've got two more things that I want to show you, three more things that I want to show you, and let's do that. So I'm going to use this image again because we're here. So why not? And we're going to scroll down to the bottom, because everything that we've talked about so far has pertained to either using a preset or using the individual Nik plugins. But there's also a really nice, relatively new feature called meta presets. And what these meta presets do is they utilize multiple pieces of Nik software to create the look that they're creating, right? And so if you, by the way that I got to this was minimized before. So I was within the Nik Selective Tool. I clicked on the little caret, which is going to go ahead and kind of open those things, the presets, but then I needed to scroll down. So I'm going to click and just scroll down. So if you couldn't find them, that's how you find them. And here within the meta presets, we have a whole great grouping of their presets, but they are mixing two pieces of software together. And kind of to know what pieces of software they're using, you've got these little icons. And so if you're brand new to the software, these might look a little bit foreign, but if we scroll back up, each one of these icons on the left side of the label pertains to that specific piece of software. So Adoxical, this first one, which is emulating, creating the look of a particular ADOX film, utilizes HDR Efex Pro and Silver Efex. Dry Plate uses Silver Efex Pro and then Analog Efex Pro. Expired Film uses Color Efex Pro and then Analog Efex Pro. And I don't need to go into each one of them, but that's what these little things actually signify, letting you know which piece of software you're using. What I like about them is they are these really dramatic adjustments that work well for a lot of different kinds of photographs. But the way that I kind of approach them personally at this point is I use them as inspiration to say, okay, well, let's go with Purple Haze. Purple Haze uses Viveza and color effects. And when I click on it, it just applies these adjustments for us. No matter what our Nik Selective Tool settings are, the meta presets will just be applied to the image. And they create that particular look, right? And in this case, I used Purple Haze and that applied Viveza and then Color Efex Pro. And what this does for me is it indicates a particular look that I could achieve. And if it works perfectly and all I got to do is click once, great. Usually I don't personally work that way, but I now know that I can create a look like this by combining Viveza and color effects. Now, let's back up for just a second because I want to show you a couple little tricks that you can utilize when utilizing these meta presets like this. First of all, because of the way that these presets are applied, they are going to be applied to your layer, whatever layer you're currently clicked on. And in my case here, we were just clicked on a regular background layer. And I don't necessarily want my background layer to have those adjustments applied most of the time. So what I'm going to do is hit Command Z a couple times to bring us back, right? So here's the original image. Then what I'm going to do is just duplicate my background layer for me, right? And I will do, basically it's a manual merge stamp visible. I'm going to show you 3 ways of doing this right now. So I can either click on my background layer and just drag it down to the lower portion of my layers palette. So I'm here in Photoshop in the layers palette. There's a little square that has a plus button in that lower right corner. And when you drag a layer over that, it makes a duplicate for you. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it on a Mac is to hit Command J. I think that's Control J on a PC. And what that does is it takes whatever layer or whatever pixels you're currently on, and it duplicates it to the next layer up. Because this is a background layer, it just duplicated all of these pixels directly up for us. The other way to do it, which is actually what's called a merge stamp visible, which is a weird set of terms, it's also a strange shortcut, is you hit Shift, Option, Command, and E at the same time. And it's not going to work for me right now for some weird reason. Let's see. I guess you can't do it with just the background. But let's say you're in a situation where you have a bunch of layers here and you need to get a composite layer generated for you. So it's a merge stamp visible. It takes every pixel, kind of makes it into its own layer. You can use the shortcut Shift, Option, Command, and E all at one time, and it's going to give you that merge stamp visible. I don't want to dwell on shortcuts here, so I'm going to keep moving. But the benefit of duplicating the background here and then going and using something like Purple Haze, right, is now I'm going to be applying my Purple Haze meta preset to this layer that's above my background, right, which then that enables me to use layer masks, blending modes, the history palette, right? You could hypothetically paint the layers in or out using the history tool, history brush that is. So this is a nice added little trick if you know to duplicate those backgrounds. Hopefully that makes sense or it renders. Okay, so meta presets. How many are there? There's a bunch of them here, and they combine different pieces of the Nik collection together to create a particular look. Usually if the black and white or if silver effects is integrated into it, you're going to get a black and white image. Let me show you one more trick that can be really useful when utilizing some of the tools within Efex Pro. By the way, this has nothing to do with the Nik Selective Tool. It has everything to do with using the algorithms, the tools within Efex Pro. It's just a cool trick. So I've just clicked on the meta preset Sprezzatura, and this is going to apply our meta presets. It's going to give us our black and white image, which has an interesting kind of grain associated and a really interesting kind of contrast overall. Her cheetah pops off of the background quite nicely now. Well, anyways, here's the trick. Because we're in Photoshop, and I know we are because that's what we're talking about today, we're able to change this blending mode from the normal blending mode down into the luminosity blending mode. So just for anyone not familiar, sorry if you are very familiar, this is probably a trick you might already know. Anyways, for anyone not familiar, to take your black and white contrast adjustments from Silver Efex and apply them on your color image, you just click on your blending modes, which is within your layers palette, and go from normal to luminosity. And now what we're getting out of this are the contrast adjustments, the brightness and tonal adjustments of Silver Efex Pro, that particular recipe or preset that we clicked on, meta preset, applied with our color information showing through from the layer beneath. And then I've just reduced the opacity of it so that it isn't such a strong effect. So it's an interesting way to control contrast. And it's a trick that I like to use because there are tools within Silver Efex Pro which are contrast adjustments that don't exist anywhere else. In fact, let me show you the last tool. It's called the brush tool. Let's jump into Silver Efex Pro 3. And we're going to start with a preset. I'll show you a couple sliders within Silver Efex Pro. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left to actually talk about these things before we sort of transition into a Q&A. I imagine there's probably good questions coming up. Hopefully I'm translating all of this stuff in a clear and concise way, but I imagine there's some confusion here or there. So I clicked on a preset within Silver Efex. I minimize the presets, by the way. To do that, you just click on this. There's a little triangle that's right next to the preview. So if this is your preview image, there's a little triangle to the left of the preview. You click on that, presets disappear. Your images get a little bit more real estate, so you've got a bigger representation of your image there. I'm going to scroll down, and within Silver Efex, you have some really interesting tools. Dynamic brightness is an algorithm that's basically only built into Silver Efex Pro, and a couple random filters within Color Efex Pro. Soft contrast is a really beautiful way of applying contrast to the image. And what's wonderful about this software, as with anytime you change the math behind how an adjustment is made, whether it's paying attention to the edges of things or the areas, or it's a contrast adjustment, as soon as you use a different tool, the aesthetic, the look that you're getting will end up being different, even if it's subtle, right? And so using different tools is a useful way of separating yourself from the next, Joe that has the same camera as you and lens and so on, right? Aside from your own creative eye and approach and timing and so on, of course. But I would say post-processing becomes a very important facet, and just simply by using some other tools, you can create a very different look and feel. Okay, so I love what's happening here on my zebras. I applied a preset. I much prefer their overall tone. I do want to take a control point here and just stick it over here on our zebra's ear, because I've blown out some of the details within the zebra. And so I'm going to put the control point there and just lower the brightness down till I get some of that texture back, and maybe a little bit of structure for texture. Okay, so the tool I want to show you now is the brush tool. And this brush capability, so if you follow my cursor into the lower right corner of the interface, the brush capability is built into the Photoshop version of the Nik Collection. So you can only use it if you're launching the Nik suite from Photoshop. If you were to click the apply button, the normal process would take place. Photoshop has done that merge stamp visible, so we've got the extra layer of pixels. We would apply the whole image in black and white. If we click the brush button, a similar process happens, except now we're going to be greeted with a new little window. And this little window it's the Nik Selective Tool, but it's now shifted. And instead of accessing the different Nik plugins, you have access to the brush capabilities, where if you follow me to the right side, you have a little trash can, which it basically generates a black layer mask for you. You have a little fill bucket. So if you click the fill bucket, it fills, it's basically like a paint bucket that's sort of pouring out. It fills in the whole layer, right? So now we've got the entire application of the silver effects. You have an eraser tool, so you can go in with your Wacom tablet or your favorite pen tablet or your mouse or however you would like to use a brush, and you can go in and erase out the effects where you don't want them to be, right? And then you, of course, have a paintbrush. So you can click on your paintbrush, and I'm just using the trackpad that's on my Mac here. I'm on a Mac, what is this, MacBook Pro? And I'm able to brush the effects in where I want them to be, and we can erase the effects out where we don't want them to be. And when we're happy with exactly where we have the effect, what we'll end up doing is clicking the erase button. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. I actually want the silver effects adjustments that we made basically just on the zebras, and then I'm going to erase it off of the background around them. And they're going to be in black and white at first, but then we'll use that little trick that I just showed you so that we'll get the color, the little bit of color that we have in the zebras. We'll get that back, but we will have the contrast adjustment that we utilize Silver Efex Pro's algorithms for. Sorry, I'm having trouble trying to brush and speak at the same time. Apparently I can't do that, which is okay, I guess, right? Okay, so I'm gonna say we're happy with the lack of precision that I've got with my brush here. Sorry about that. I'm gonna click the apply button here. And what's gonna happen is once I've clicked the apply button, I now have my layer with my layer mask. Yeah, please don't judge my masking. It's terrible, really. Let's look at it. Yeah, it's bad. But here's that trick again. I'm gonna minimize the Nik Selective Tool, hide that. We're gonna go into the layers palette, and I'm gonna go ahead and just switch this blending mode from normal down to luminosity. And now I've got the contrast adjustments we made on the zebras, but the color still, right? And so if I toggle this effect on and off, I've now used those very specific algorithms that are within Silver Efex Pro, the math, the sliders, the tools themselves, and we've applied it just on the zebras to bring out some of this interesting contrast. And actually, if you, I'm gonna hit tab. I can't hit tab on my keyboard because then I won't be able to turn my layer off. If you kind of lean back in your chair a little bit and squint your eyes, as I toggle this on and off, you'll see the original image is a little bit, perfect exposure, focus is great. Lori, you killed it with this image. But right now, because of the way that I process the raw file, is a little bit flat. Well, I go in and I add this silver effects adjustment, and now the zebras start to pop. They come off of the background, and the background still has the subdued contrast of the original capture, and therefore now we have this separation of the zebras off of the background even more than the original capture had with that very short depth of field with a long lens. All right, Lori, I think I covered all of the things that we said we were going to cover, and then actually a couple more things. And I'm wondering if we can transition into our Q&A.
Sounds great. Okay, so let's see. Several people are asking if you could show smart objects and if you can go back and edit with the Nik. That'd be great.
Absolutely, right. So we didn't discuss smart objects at all. And for anyone not familiar, working with a smart object and a smart filter allows you to work in technically a truly non-destructive process, especially if you open an image into Adobe Camera Raw and tell it to be a smart object. I'm going to go ahead and convert this dumb file, if you will. It's a TIFF, it's an 8-bit TIFF file, apparently. I'm going to convert that into a smart object. And to do that, you just right-click, you go into your layers palette, right-click on the layer itself, and then say convert to smart object. By the way, the smart way to do this, if I wanted to work in a full smart object workflow, would be to close the cheetah, open it back up as a raw file, and then in Adobe Camera Raw, basically make this conversion happen. But this is fine. I'll show you how to use the Nik collection with the smart objects. So my layer now is a smart object, and that's indicated in that lower right area of the little avatar image. So we've got the pixels, and then this is indicating that this is a smart object. If we now go into FDS, it doesn't matter. Let's go into analog. We haven't talked about analog Efex Pro. Let's just see what happens if I do last edit. I'm going to click on last edit of analog Efex Pro. It's going to launch the software for us. It is okay. So this is a warning. This is letting us know that we are working with a smart object, and because it's a smart object, the brush tool is deactivated. Technically, you can still use layer masks kind of with smart objects, but I'm going to click the OK button. That's what that warning is telling us. All right, so let's say we like this. I think my film type's a little warm, so let's go and apply a cooler one. I'm just going to go to cool. There we go. So let's say we love that, and reduce the strength a little bit. I'm going to click the OK button, and then basically that's going to apply the adjustment as a smart object. Sorry, as a smart filter. Apologies. So we have layer 0, which is technically the smart object. You have a smart filtered layer mask, and then you have analog Efex Pro as a filter, smart filter applied down here. The beauty of that smart filter is that you can save this file as a TIFF file or a PSD, and it's going to retain the smart object capability. So you can close the file, open it back up, and then even come back into Analog Efex Pro afterwards to reprocess the image. So check this out. If I double click on Analog Efex Pro, the software is going to launch again. That's going to go ahead and warn us that we're on a smart object. It's fine. The exact adjustments that we had will still be applied to the image. And now I'm going to make some dramatic adjustments here, just so that you can see like a major difference between these adjustments. Let's go to eroded. Let's put a major tone. There we go. Click the OK button. Those adjustments will be reflected. And then, of course, we can even go into color effects and keep utilizing this smart object capability. And what's going to happen is our smart filters that we're applying, they're going to be stacked within our smart filter stack. I'll show you kind of more what that means. I've just saturated the heck out of this. I'm sorry if it's making anybody's eyes bleed a little bit, but hopefully it's not that bad. I do like the added color, but I think I've sort of overdone it with analog. Anyways, I click the OK button, and voila, now I have color effects and analog Efex Pro as smart filters applied right there. So we can continue to open them and close them and adjust them and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, and then if you had control points on there.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, we didn't even talk about control points. Great point, Lori. Any adjustments, including control points or sliders, are going to be saved into your smart filter. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Okay. Bob is asking, please have Dan comment on how you can return to Nik from a layer that was automatically generated in Photoshop when the option to open in Photoshop was checked. Does that make sense?
No. Can you ask again?
Yeah. How can you return to Nik from a layer that was automatically generated in Photoshop when the option to open Photoshop was checked? I'm trying to figure this out too.
I'm not entirely sure of the question, but I don't think that unless you're working in this process with smart objects,
yeah,
I don't think that that's possible. Once you sort of hit the OK button or applied the adjustment in Photoshop, it's kind of baked into the pixels. And that's why it's a good idea to either work as a smart object or duplicate your background so that if you need to go back to the original pixels, you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Ron was curious how often you reuse your recipes. Do you find that you just use them once, or do you reuse them again on other images?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have two approaches in that regard. One is when I make a recipe, sometimes I make like a broad stroke look that isn't specific, that's just like going to do something that, like really shifts to a cool blue night, right? Or natural film effect, like those are broad recipes that could be used on a whole bunch of different kinds of images that are used, from, spanning from 2007 to now or something like that. Whereas this recipe where it says DT Rust project, this is a recipe that was specifically built for a series of pictures. I'll click on it, it'll launch, and it'll apply, bleach bypass, cross processing, and darken, light, and center at these particular settings that worked well for a series of images that were shot in the studios, right? And so this made it an easy way to get a consistent look across this whole series of images, but probably won't use it aside for, those particular images. I have a black and white recipe that's the same. So Portrait Glow, PHAR1. I shot a series of portraits of my Photo Arts 1 class from last semester. It's like Photography 101. I shot them on film. I processed the film, scanned them, and then I massaged the tonalities using this recipe or preset with Silver Efex, and that really was just specifically for the 15 images that I was making for my students. Yeah, good question.
Okay.
So the answer is yes and no.
Okay. Yeah. Maureen is asking, what was the name of the preset you used before applying luminosity mode? I think you were in Silver Efex at that point. You're showing. Do you remember which preset that was offhand?
It was with, let's look. No, but it was either Dark Glow or, and I'll just open up Silver Efex because it was in the En Vogue series. It was either Dark Selenium or Dark Glow. Oh, it could have been more silver. Shoot, it's one of those three. I'm sorry.
No problem. We will be recording this and posting it probably at the end of this week. So if folks want to go back and review that. Okay, several questions. People are asking if they can create their own meta presets, and I'm letting people know that not at this time. You're not able to. And one of the big differences between meta presets and a recipe is that with meta presets, you can apply effects to several different plugins versus a recipe. You're in either Silver Efex or you're in Color Efex. So that was one of the big questions here.
I just converted this image to a smart object, and I'm gonna go ahead and click on one of these meta presets because I don't remember what happens. So if I click on expired film, it's going to apply that, and it's going to apply color effects and then analog effects, I think, if I remember that particular meta preset properly. Yeah. And let's see. Okay, it applies it. Cool. So this is actually a really great way to use meta presets and actually be able to kind of massage the tones, it looks like anyways. So once this finishes, yeah, because I can go into color effects now. Okay, so that's just telling me that because I have multiple Nik plugins. That little warning that popped up from Photoshop was just letting me know that I had multiple Nik plugins, so my preview isn't going to look the way that you might completely expect. But anyways, using the meta presets with a smart object allows you to kind of go in and adjust it and make, other controls. If that makes any sense at all. Yeah.
Good tip, Dan. Okay. And then several people are asking if smart objects, once you apply that, does it increase the file size?
Ultimately, yes. It not exactly the same way as when you duplicate a layer of pixels, but it does make for a larger file. Yeah. So I haven't done the math in a while, but anytime, so if you have a regular layer of pixels, let's say like this one background layer is, let's say 5 megabytes. If you duplicate that layer of pixels and adjust it, you're looking at a file that's probably 10 megabytes, right? Because you've just doubled the number of, pixels that are based within the file, give or take, depending upon what you're doing. Smart objects don't do that exactly the same way, but it does save a larger file, and so it does take up space on your hard drive, just not exactly the same as a regular workflow. Yeah.
Okay. Great, Dan. Excellent presentation. And I hope everybody enjoyed that. Looks like they have, and gained some new knowledge from this presentation. So thanks again, Dan. And I'll go ahead and let you say goodbye to everybody. So thanks, Dan.
Geez, absolutely, Lori. My pleasure. Thank you. This was, I guess, the first webinar I've done this year. So happy 2022. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Thanks for having me, Lori and DxO and Nik Software, and thanks for coming out to the webinar, ladies and gentlemen. I've got another webinar coming up in March. If you like this demonstration, come back and join us. And there's tons of webinars and recorded content directly from DxO on the website, in the Nik Collection website, and on YouTube as well. So check it out. If you're not too bored of listening to my voice, you can listen to me more. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.